the alien queen shouted. "Who repaired this armor?" A human engineer stepped forward. The quantum engines of the Astral Dominion hummed their familiar death song, a low vibration that rattled through the deck plating and into Kai Brennan's bones. He'd been listening to that particular mechanical wheeze for 3 years now, ever since the Kytherians had plucked him from the wreckage of Research Station Omega-7. 3 years of servitude, 3 years of pretending to be just another broken human engineer while secretly cataloging every weakness in their supposedly superior technology. The irony wasn't lost on him that the most advanced warship in the Kytherian fleet sounded like his grandfather's ancient combustion truck struggling up a hill. Kai wiped the synthetic lubricant from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades, watching the other human engineers scurry about their duties like caffeinated mice. The morning shift always carried an edge of barely controlled panic, especially after a battle. The Kytherians had a charming habit of blaming equipment failures on human incompetence, rather than their own stubborn refusal to read the technical manuals they'd stolen along with the engineers who wrote them. "Brennan." The gravelly voice of Supervisor Vextar cut through the ambient noise like a rusty blade. The Kytherian's elongated ears twitched with irritation, a tell that Kai had learned to read like a barometric pressure gauge. Status report on the primary fusion conduits. Kai glanced up from the neural interface panel he'd been pretending to calibrate. Vextar stood 7 feet tall, his blue-tinged skin gleaming under the harsh work lights, those distinctive pointed ears giving him the appearance of a very angry, very large space elf. Which, Kai reflected, wasn't entirely inaccurate. "Running at 93% efficiency," Kai reported, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "The starboard coupling is developing a harmonic resonance that'll need attention within the next 48 hours. Vextar's ears flattened slightly. In Kytherian body language, this was roughly equivalent to a human rolling their eyes. Humans and their obsession with preventive maintenance. The systems will function until they do not. "Sure," Kai muttered under his breath. "And when they don't, guess who gets blamed for not predicting the unpredictable?" The supervisor's acute hearing caught the comment, but before he could respond, the ship's communication array crackled to life with the voice of Communications Officer Rillan. Her tone carried the kind of forced calm that usually preceded very bad news. "All department supervisors to War Council Chamber 7. Priority Alpha. The Queen requests immediate status reports on all battle damage from the previous engagement." Vextar's skin shifted to a paler shade of blue, which Kai had learned was the Kytherian equivalent of going white as a sheet. Priority Alpha meant someone was about to have a very bad day, and given the Queen's legendary temper, possibly a very short remaining lifespan. "Continue your duties," Vextar barked to the assembled humans before striding toward the exit with a kind of purposeful gait that suggested he was walking to his own execution. The moment the supervisor disappeared, the tension in the engineering bay evaporated like morning mist. Jenkins, a former Coalition naval engineer with a perpetually oil-stained beard, sidled over to Kai's workstation. 10 credits says old pointy ears doesn't make it back from this meeting," Jenkins whispered, his eyes gleaming with a kind of morbid humor that kept them all sane in this floating metal prison. "No bet," Kai replied, checking the power readings on his display. "Did you see the Queen's armor when she came back from the last sortie? Hard to miss. Looked like someone had used it for target practice." Jenkins lowered his voice further. "Word is the quantum shielding failed completely. Left her exposed for nearly 30 seconds before her guards could pull her back to the ship." Kai's hands stilled on his tools. 30 seconds might not sound like much, but in space combat, it was an eternity. More importantly, he knew exactly why the Queen's personal armor had failed, because he was the one who had repaired it 2 days ago. The memory was crystal clear, Vextar dragging him from his assigned duties to fix what the Kytherian engineers had somehow managed to break while trying to improve the human-designed power coupling system. They'd attempted to integrate their own quantum resonance technology with the original design, creating a hybrid system that violated about 12 fundamental laws of physics. Kai had warned them it wouldn't work. They'd ignored him, naturally, because what could a mere human possibly know about advanced technology? So he'd fixed it. Sort of. The armor would function perfectly for exactly one combat engagement, after which the incompatible technologies would create a cascade failure in the shielding matrix. He'd even been thoughtful enough to make it look like a random malfunction rather than deliberate sabotage. The fact that Queen Zyreth had survived the shield failure was actually somewhat disappointing. Kai had nothing personal against her. Well, except for the whole enslaving his species thing. But her death might have created enough chaos in the command structure to give the coalition a fighting chance. A soft chime echoed through the engineering bay, followed by the voice of Chief Engineer Morthan over the internal communication system. His usually steady tone carried an unmistakable tremor of fear. All human engineering personnel are to remain at their stations until further notice. Any deviation from assigned duties will be met with immediate disciplinary action. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. Well, that's ominous. Think they've figured out what went wrong with the royal armor? Probably, Kai replied, his attention seemingly focused on the diagnostic readout in front of him. The question is whether they'll blame it on human sabotage or their own stupidity. Smart money's on sabotage. It's always sabotage with these people. Jenkins glanced around nervously. Though between you and me, I wouldn't be entirely opposed to a little creative maintenance if it meant getting home sooner. Kai nodded absently, but his mind was already racing ahead to the inevitable investigation that would follow. The Kytherians might be arrogant and culturally rigid, but they weren't stupid. Eventually, someone would trace the armor failure back to the repair work, and when they did, there would be consequences. The question was, would those consequences finally create the opportunity he'd been waiting 3 years to exploit? The war hall doors burst open with the theatrical flair that Queen Ziraeth had perfected over 2 decades of absolute rule. Her footsteps echoed across the polished metal floor like gunshots, each impact a deliberate announcement of her presence and her fury. The assembled Kytherian engineers, who moments before had been engaged in animated discussions about quantum field theory and plasma containment, now stood at rigid attention with the collective posture of condemned prisoners. Kai pressed himself against the maintenance alcove where he'd been pretending to recalibrate a power coupling, watching through the translucent aluminum partition as the Queen strode to the center of the chamber. Her battle armor, the very same suit he'd sabotaged 2 days earlier, was draped over her left arm like a blackened, scorched accusation. Sections of the quantum mesh hung in tatters, and the primary chest plate bore a crater-sized burn mark that would have been fatal if not for the emergency personal shields her guards carried. Behold! Queen Ziraeth's voice rang out with a kind of controlled rage that made grown Kytherian warriors reconsider their career choices, the masterwork of Kytherian engineering. She held the ruined armor aloft, and even from his hiding spot, Kai could see how her elongated ears had darkened to an almost purple hue, a sure sign that someone was about to have a very educational discussion about accountability. Chief Engineer Morthan, his usual blue-gray complexion now resembling week-old fish, stepped forward with visible reluctance. My Queen, the preliminary analysis suggests a catastrophic resonance cascade in the quantum shielding matrix, possibly caused by... Possibly. The Queen's interruption could have frozen helium. Possibly caused by incompetence, you mean? Or perhaps sabotage? Which explanation appeals to you more than... The chief engineer's ears drooped like wilted flowers. Neither explanation appeals to me, Your Majesty. However, the technical specifications clearly indicate that the hybrid coupling system should have maintained harmonic stability for at least... Should have. Ziraeth set the armor down with exaggerated care, as if handling a live explosive. Tell me, Morthan, should have scenarios deflect coalition plasma cannons? Do theoretical calculations prevent assassination attempts? From his concealed position, Kai had to admire the Queen's interrogation technique. She'd managed to reduce a brilliant engineer to a stammering mess using nothing but precise diction and the implied threat of very unpleasant consequences. It was almost artistic in its efficiency. Engineer Vextar, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of survival, cleared his throat nervously. My Queen, if I may suggest, the problem might lie in the fundamental incompatibility between human technological principles and our own superior quantum dynamics. Perhaps the human engineers assigned to maintenance duties lack the intellectual capacity to... Are you suggesting... The Queen's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouting, that our supposedly inferior human captives are capable of creating technology that confounds our greatest minds? Vextar's mouth opened and closed several times, producing no sound beyond a faint wheezing noise. Kai bit his lip to keep from laughing. The supervisor who'd spent 3 years lecturing human engineers about their technological limitations was now being forced to choose between admitting human superiority or accepting responsibility for the armor failure. Perhaps, another engineer named Zekrin ventured hopefully, the issue stems from cosmic frequency misalignment. The battle occurred near the Proxima Nebula, and the exotic particles there are known to interfere with quantum resonance patterns. Queen Ziraeth turned her full attention to Zekrin, and Kai watched the engineer's bioluminescent skin patches flicker nervously. Cosmic frequency misalignment. How wonderfully creative. Tell me, Zekrin, in your professional opinion, should we delay all future military operations until the universe achieves proper harmonic balance? Well, no, Your Majesty, but the theoretical framework clearly demonstrates that nebular particle interactions can create unpredictable quantum fluctuations that might theoretically affect. Theoretically. The Queen's repetition of the word carried enough sarcasm to power a small star. I'm beginning to detect a pattern in these explanations. Theoretical failures, possible malfunctions, cosmic interference. What I'm not hearing are the words, my fault, or, I accept responsibility. The assembled engineers studied their feat with the intensity of archaeologists examining ancient artifacts. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Engineer Polek, evidently deciding that boldness was his only remaining option, stepped forward. Your Majesty, if I may be so bold as to suggest that the fault lies not with our engineering prowess, but with the inferior materials we've been forced to work with. The human-designed components lack the elegant sophistication of true Kytherian craftsmanship, and when integrated with our superior technology, they create complications. Kai nearly choked on suppressed laughter. Polek had just inadvertently described exactly why the sabotage had worked so perfectly. The inferior human components had been designed with built-in safety protocols and redundant systems, while the superior Kytherian additions had been created with the kind of arrogant overconfidence that ignored basic physics. Queen Ziraeth began pacing, her footsteps creating a rhythmic counterpoint to the ship's engine humming. So what you're telling me, collectively, is that our advanced civilization, capable of interstellar travel and quantum manipulation, has been defeated by the technological equivalent of stone knives and bearskins? Not defeated, Your Majesty, Morthen said desperately, merely temporarily inconvenienced. Temporarily inconvenienced. The Queen stopped pacing and fixed the chief engineer with a stare that could have melted titanium. I was 30 seconds away from becoming a cloud of superheated plasma, and you call that temporary inconvenience? Engineer Dexlon, who had remained silent throughout the interrogation, finally spoke up with the kind of desperate inspiration that came from facing certain doom. Perhaps we should consult with the human maintenance staff. They might possess primitive insights that could illuminate the source of this temporary inconvenience. The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic gas cloud. The other engineers stared at Dexlon with expressions ranging from horror to grudging admiration for his creative problem-solving. Consulting with human slaves about technical problems wasn't just unprecedented, it bordered on cultural heresy. Queen Ziraeth's ears twitched with something that might have been amusement. You're suggesting that we lower ourselves to seeking advice from our captives? Not advice, Your Majesty, Dexlon said quickly, merely clarification of their crude methodologies, so that we might better understand how to avoid similar compatibility issues in the future. The Queen considered this for a long moment, during which every engineer in the room contemplated their mortality with uncomfortable clarity. Finally, she spoke. Very well. Bring me the human who performed the last maintenance cycle on my armor. Perhaps it's time we had a conversation about the consequences of incompetence. The summons arrived with all the ceremony of a death warrant. Guard Captain Corvesh appeared at the engineering bay's entrance like a blue-skinned harbinger of doom, his ceremonial plasma rifle gleaming under the worklights. His elongated ears were rigid with military precision, and his expression carried the kind of professional indifference that suggested he'd escorted plenty of humans to unpleasant meetings and expected this one to end similarly. Jenkins dropped his plasma torch with a clatter that seemed absurdly loud in the sudden silence. Every human in the bay turned to stare at Kai with expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that it wasn't them. Martinez, a former coalition communications specialist, made a subtle throat-cutting gesture behind the guard's back, which Kai found both helpful and deeply encouraging. Well, Kai said, setting down his diagnostic tools with deliberate calm, I suppose this is about that overdue library book. The joke fell flat among the terrified humans, but Corvesh's ears twitched slightly, which might have been Kytherian amusement or possibly just irritation. With aliens, it was always difficult to tell. The walk to the war hall felt like a condemned man's final mile, if condemned men typically walked through corridors lined with quantum field generators and artificial gravity plates. Kai had made this journey before, but never under circumstances that suggested he might not be making a return trip. The ship's ambient lighting seemed more ominous than usual, casting sharp shadows that made every junction look like a potential ambush point. "Question," Kai said as they passed a maintenance hatch he'd repaired just last week. "Is this the kind of meeting where I should be concerned about my continued existence, or just my continued comfort?" Corvesh glanced down at him with what might have been surprise. Most humans facing royal summons tended toward either desperate pleading or stunned silence. Casual conversation wasn't typically part of the experience. "The Queen wishes to discuss technical matters," the guard captain replied diplomatically. "Your survival depends entirely on the quality of your answers." "Ah, a performance review. I should have updated my resume." This time Corvesh's ear twitch was definitely amusement. Humans are strange creatures. Facing possible execution, and you make jokes. "It's either jokes or screaming," Kai replied. "And screaming gives me a sore throat." The war hall's massive doors slid open with their characteristic whoosh of pressurized air. The chamber beyond was a testament to Kytherian engineering aesthetics. Vast, imposing, and designed to make visitors feel approximately the size of microorganisms. Queen Zyrayeth stood at the center of the space, her damaged armor displayed on a maintenance stand beside her like evidence in a trial. The assembled Kytherian engineers had arranged themselves in a precise semicircle behind their queen, their postures suggesting they were deeply interested in witnessing the upcoming interrogation while remaining as far from potential splash damage as possible. Engineer Vextar avoided eye contact entirely, suddenly finding the ceiling panels fascinating. Queen Zyrayeth turned as Kai entered, and he found himself face to face with the ruler of the most powerful military force in known space. Her elongated ears were fully erect and alert, her bioluminescent skin patterns flickering with controlled energy. Her eyes, a startling shade of violet that seemed to glow with their own inner light, fixed on his with an intensity that suggested she could read his thoughts, catalog his secrets, and probably calculate his remaining lifespan with uncomfortable accuracy. "So," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber like a perfectly tuned instrument, "you are the human who repaired my armor." It wasn't a question, but Kai nodded anyway. "Guilty as charged, Your Majesty. Though in my defense, it was already broken when I got it." Several of the Kytherian engineers made small choking sounds. Apparently, casual responses to royal interrogations weren't standard protocol. Queen Zyrayeth's ears tilted forward slightly, a gesture Kai had learned indicated either intense interest or the prelude to violent action. Given the circumstances, he was hoping for the former. "My engineers tell me the armor suffered a catastrophic failure during combat," the Queen continued, beginning to circle him like a predator evaluating prey. "They have provided numerous theories about cosmic interference, material incompatibilities, and quantum resonance cascades. What is your assessment of their explanations?" Kai glanced at the assembled engineers, all of whom were studying him with the kind of attention usually reserved for particularly dangerous explosives. Vextar had gone pale enough that his blue-tinted skin looked almost gray. "Well," Kai said carefully, "they're certainly creative. I particularly enjoyed the bit about cosmic frequency misalignment. That's not something you hear every day. But not accurate. About as accurate as saying your ship's engines run on good intentions and positive thinking." Engineer Zekrin made a strangled noise that might have been protest or possibly the early stages of cardiac arrest. Queen Zyrayeth's expression shifted into something that could charitably be called a smile, though it contained enough sharp edges to be classified as a weapon. "Enlighten me," she said. "What actually caused the armor failure?" This was the moment Kai had been both dreading and anticipating for 3 years. He could lie, blame random malfunction or sabotage by unknown parties. He could throw the Kytherian engineers under the proverbial transport shuttle by exposing their incompetence. Or he could tell the truth and hope that honesty, combined with his value as an engineer, might buy him something more valuable than continued servitude. The hybrid coupling system was fundamentally flawed, he said, meeting her gaze directly. Your engineers tried to integrate human safety protocols with Kytherian quantum enhancement technology. The two systems have completely different operational philosophies. Human tech is designed to fail safely and predictably. Kytherian tech is designed to push performance to theoretical limits regardless of risk. When you combine them improperly, you get exactly what happened to your armor. And you knew this when you performed the repairs? Here it was. The question that would determine whether he spent his remaining years as a slave engineer or as component atoms scattered across several star systems. Yes, he said simply. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a gravity weapon. Every Kytherian in the chamber seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. Even the ship's omnipresent engine humming seemed to pause in anticipation. Queen Ziraeth stopped circling and faced him directly. You knew the repair would fail, and you performed it anyway. Yes. Why? Kai took a deep breath, acutely aware that his next words would either doom him or change everything. Because someone needed to prove that your superior technology isn't as superior as you think. And because 30 seconds of vulnerability in combat beats 3 years of invulnerability in chains. The Queen's bioluminescent patterns flared brighter, and for a moment Kai thought he'd pushed too far. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It was a sound like crystal chimes in a storm, beautiful and dangerous and completely unpredictable. You sabotaged my armor to make a point about technological philosophy? I sabotaged your armor to save both our species from a war neither of us can win. Queen Ziraeth's laughter faded into a silence so profound that Kai could hear the quantum processors humming in the ship's neural network 3 decks below. The assembled Kytherian engineers stood frozen like statues, their bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically as they processed the unprecedented sight of their absolute monarch finding amusement in an act of sabotage. To save both our species, the Queen repeated slowly, her violet eyes never leaving Kai's face. How remarkably presumptuous of you. Tell me, human, what makes you think this war cannot be won? Kai glanced at the ruined armor, then back at the most powerful being in known space. 3 years of careful observation and secret analysis had led to this moment, and he realized he had exactly one chance to change the trajectory of an interstellar conflict. Because you're fighting the wrong enemy, he said. Both of us are. Engineer more than made a choking sound. Your Majesty, surely you cannot seriously consider the delusional ramblings of a saboteur. Silence. The Queen's command cut through the chief engineer's protest like a plasma blade through butter. Continue, human. Kai felt the weight of every eye in the chamber upon him. The coalition isn't your real threat. Neither are the Kytherians ours. We're both advanced spacefaring civilizations depleting our resources fighting each other while the Zirian collective builds their strength in the outer rim. You know about them, don't you? The Queen's ears twitched almost imperceptibly. Intelligence reports suggest isolated raiding parties, nothing more. Intelligence reports are wrong. I've been monitoring your own sensor data for 3 years, Your Majesty. The raiding parties have been systematically harvesting quantum materials from dead worlds in both our territories. They're not random attacks, they're preparation for something much larger. Preposterous, Vextar interjected, his courage apparently returning now that the conversation had moved away from his personal failings. A slave engineer could not possibly access classified sensor data. Kai smiled. You'd be amazed what maintenance personnel can access when they're the ones calibrating the sensors. Every diagnostic I've run, every system I've repaired, every malfunction I've investigated, I've been building a database. The Zirions aren't just raiding. They're strip mining both our territories to build a fleet that'll make this war look like a playground argument. Queen Ziraeth began pacing again, but this time her movement carried thoughtful energy rather than predatory menace. Assuming your analysis is correct, what do you propose we do about it? Stop fighting each other and start sharing technology. Real sharing, not the half measures and sabotage that got us here. Kai gestured toward the damaged armor. Your quantum enhancement systems are remarkable, but they're unstable because they ignore safety margins. Human engineering prioritizes reliability and redundancy, but we lack the power output for true quantum manipulation. Combine them properly, And you get technology that's both revolutionary and reliable. Engineer Dexlon stepped forward hesitantly. The theoretical framework does have merit, Your Majesty. If we could stabilize the quantum resonance patterns using human fail-safe protocols. You're talking about the most significant technological collaboration in galactic history, the Queen said. The political ramifications alone would. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship, their shrill warning cutting through the discussion like ice water through warm steel. The chamber's tactical display activated automatically, showing 3 coalition battleships dropping out of hyperspace directly ahead of the Astral Dominion. Your Majesty, Communications Officer Rillan's voice crackled through the intercom, coalition forces are demanding our immediate surrender. They claim to have intelligence about human prisoners aboard this vessel. Kai felt his heart skip. That'll be the rescue operation I've been feeding information to for the past 6 months. Every Kytherian in the chamber stared at him with expressions ranging from outrage to grudging admiration. Queen Zyraetha's ears flattened against her skull, but her eyes held more curiosity than anger. You've been quite busy during your captivity, she observed. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. Or in this case, the saboteur's laboratory. Kai looked at the tactical display showing the coalition ships moving into attack formation. But if you want proof that cooperation works better than conquest, I can fix your armor right now. Properly this time. Give me 10 minutes and I'll show you what human Kytherian technology can really accomplish. 10 minutes while coalition ships prepare to attack my vessel? Trust me. If this works, those ships won't be your problem much longer. Queen Zyraeth stared at him for a long moment, then gestured toward the damaged armor. Proceed. But if this is another sabotage attempt. If this is sabotage, you can feed me to the quantum recyclers personally. Kai moved to the armor stand and began examining the damaged quantum mesh. Vextar, I need a resonance calibrator and a phase alignment tool. More than, activate the diagnostic array. And someone get me a cup of that liquid stimulant the Kytherians call coffee, because this is going to require more precision than I've ever attempted. The next 8 minutes transformed the war hall into organized chaos. Kai worked with desperate efficiency, integrating human safety protocols into the Kytherian quantum enhancement matrix while explaining each modification to the fascinated engineers surrounding him. The armor's quantum field generators hummed to life with a stable resonance pattern that made several Kytherians gasp in surprise. The power output is 30% higher than our previous maximum, Engineer Zekrin reported, his voice filled with wonder. But the safety margins are actually improved. That's the beauty of proper integration, Kai said, making final adjustments to the chest plate. You don't have to choose between power and safety when you design the systems to work together instead of fighting each other. Queen Zyraeth stepped into the repaired armor as the final components locked into place. The quantum mesh flowed around her like liquid light, and the power readings on nearby displays jumped to levels that made even the most experienced engineers whistle in appreciation. Remarkable, she murmured, flexing her armored fingers as energy patterns danced across the suit's surface. I can feel the difference. The power flow is harmonious. Your Majesty, Rillan's voice interrupted urgently, the coalition ships are powering weapons. They demand a response in 30 seconds. Queen Zyraeth looked at Kai, her expression unreadable. You've demonstrated the potential of cooperation, human. Now let us see if you can demonstrate its necessity. She activated the ship's communication array with a gesture. Coalition vessels, this is Queen Zyraeth of the Kytherian Empire. I propose we discuss terms of ceasefire and mutual cooperation. We have a common enemy that threatens both our civilizations, and continued conflict between us serves only to weaken our defenses against a greater threat. The response crackled back immediately. This is Admiral Chen of the Coalition 5th Fleet. We're prepared to listen, but any sign of deception will result in immediate hostile action. Kai grinned. Admiral Chen. My old commander from the Academy. This should be interesting. 3 hours later, the Astral Dominion and the Coalition fleet hung motionless in space while representatives from both governments held the first diplomatic talks in over a decade. Kai found himself serving as technical advisor and unofficial translator, explaining quantum enhancement theory to human scientists while helping Kytherian engineers understand the principles of redundant safety systems. "So," Jenkins said as he joined Kai at an observation port overlooking the diplomatic shuttle bay, "think this alliance thing will actually work?" Kai watched Queen Zyreth and Admiral Chen examining holographic displays showing Xerian fleet movements in the Outer Rim. "Ask me again in 6 months. But for the first time in 3 years, I think both our species might actually have a future." "No more sabotage, then?" "Oh, I'm sure there'll be plenty of sabotage. But next time, it'll be directed at our real enemies instead of each other." The end.